Welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Gynarchy Patel. Here we place women's health and feminism front and center where they belong, engaging in conversations that range from the fundamental to the fearless. With insights from expert guests, we aim to break through the barriers of the patriarchy and envision a new world led by the Gynarchy. So let's get started and dive right in. Welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Gynarchy Patel. And today we're talking fitness basics with my guests, Dr. Sarah Court and Laurel Beversdorf. So hello, Sarah.
Hi.
I'll start with you. Dr. Sarah Court is a doctor of physical therapy who offers both in-person and online sessions, blending decades of experience in yoga, Pilates, and physical therapy. She is the co-founder of Movement Logic with Laurel Beversdorf, where they help women build lifelong strength through barbells in the Lift for Longevity program and through evidence-based conversations on the Movement Logic podcast. In 2021, Sarah was diagnosed with breast cancer. After surgery and chemotherapy, she created a free online exercise video series for people going through or recovering from cancer treatment, progressing from gentle yoga to strength training with weights. Okay, so welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I will now introduce Laurel Beversdorf. Hello.
Hello.
Laurel is a strength and conditioning coach, run coach, and yoga teacher with over 20 years of experience helping people build real-world strength for everyday life. She works with recreational athletes, busy parents, and anyone who wants to feel more capable, from keeping up with the kids to performing better in sports and daily activities. Laurel is a Boston qualifying marathoner, frequent top finisher at local races, and is currently pursuing a master's in kinesiology at Alabama A&M University. She is the co-founder of Movement Logic with Dr. Sarah Court, and where they co-host the Movement Logic Strong Opinions Loosely Held podcast. And they also teach a 6-month online barbell course to help women build strength for life. Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, guys. You guys are so kick-ass. I love it. And it's what a complimentary combo. I love that. Physical therapist and a strength coach. Really genius. And I'm excited to talk to you.
Cool.
We're excited to talk to you.
Yeah.
So I always start with, I know we got a nice intro here with your bios, but I always like to hear, is that obviously I have a lot of women. It's a woman forward kind of podcast. And I also think it's just interesting to hear about people's backgrounds, because I think a lot of people are trying to decide where their interests are and what they want to pursue in life. So I love to hear how you came to be doing what you're doing. So who would like to start?
I can start. Both of us were only or primarily yoga teachers at the beginning of our
This is Sarah.
I'm Sarah.
In case people are listening, just audio only. So, yeah. Okay. Sorry, Sarah.
No problem. Yeah. So we both started as yoga teachers, and it was in the world of teaching yoga that we met initially, and just sort of, kept an eye on each other. I think we were sort of like, you're interesting. And then after a little while, we decided to create Movement Logic. We worked for the first few years with several other exercise specialists to create tutorials for movement teachers, yoga teachers, Pilates teachers. And then Laurel and I just kind of continued on our own. We started creating the podcast, and we both started really focusing more on strength training for women. And in particular, our focus has been teaching women to use barbells and doing a lot of myth busting around the sort of belief held by a lot of women that barbells are not for them for various reasons, whether it's like it's going to make you bulky, or it's too dangerous for you, or, that area of the gym feels intimidating. So a big part of our work is, I guess you could sort of frame it as how women get to exercise in a patriarchy, right? Like, what are the rules for women, quote unquote rules? How are they different than the quote unquote rules for men? Should they be different? And so we spend a lot of time talking about that kind of stuff on the podcast as well. I think that sort of summarizes what we do.
Yeah, I don't really have that much to add other than the population of women that Sarah and I were working with in yoga tended to be women who were physically active. Obviously, they're doing yoga, but were, for various reasons, convinced that strength training just wasn't for them, or that it was going to, impact their yoga practice in a negative way. Or, I'm sure because women live in this society where we're constantly being told that, we need to look a certain way. There might have been fears and concerns around body composition changes that would make them too bulky. So I think that Sarah and I both just decided, when we were going to teach strength training, that we weren't going to beat around the bush and we were going to go straight to, for better or for worse, like the biggest, scariest piece of equipment that women could imagine lifting. And we were going to completely deconstruct and demystify not only that piece of equipment, but all of the ideas wrapped up in and around that piece of equipment and femininity, what it means to be a woman.
Wonderful. I mean, you really just, touched upon exactly why I wanted to do this podcast, because, I do think living in a patriarchy, like women use exercise, sometimes not for great reasons, and I wanted us to talk about, obviously, using exercise to improve our health and our strength instead of trying to always shrink ourselves.
Yeah.
Which is, a lot of us did that and do that. So, and another reason I wanted to talk about this topic was because, there's just an explosion of fitness and wellness influencers online. And, thanks to the patriarchy and its beauty ideals, a big target, huge target is women. And it's really just hard for women to know, whom to trust, what information to trust. And so I ran across your profile, scrolling on Instagram. And I think you guys went viral for something called Doctor versus Brand. Yes. So I thought that was amazing, really excellent. And it's just really good for people to understand. So I'd love for you to maybe start there. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was something, we spend some amount of time on Instagram and in our podcast going after the sources that we see online that we see are, for want of a better word, lying, that are overpromising, under-delivering on a product, that are using, classic marketing tactics like fear-mongering and not all sorts of things like that. And then a sort of niche of that we focus on is when doctors do it, because we think it's in fact even a little bit more insidious, because a clinician of any kind, and in particular a medical doctor, is coming with that white coat energy, for one of it. They've got white coat vibes.
Yeah.
Right. And so people look at a doctor and they think, well, they're on social media, and in this confusing world of messages, surely this doctor is not going to steer me wrong. Right. So they get this sort of automatic pass a lot of the time. And we've seen this specifically in the menopause space, because there was so much desire for information from women around menopause. And so very quickly, all of the, I'm just going to say it like I see it, all of the grifters jumped in to that space because it's a huge market. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it's millions and millions of dollars a year. And so the point of this particular, it was a series of posts, it was a series of slides rather. The point of it was to kind of highlight, okay, yes, this person is a doctor, but are they behaving the way a doctor has promised, in effect, to behave? Or are they now behaving more like somebody who's selling something, which we call a brand? And so we went through these various behavioral changes with things like, if they're acting like a doctor, they're willing to change their message based on new evidence. But if they're acting like a brand, they can't change their message because they can't change the product that they're selling. So they have to double down on their message in the face of new evidence, things like that. Right. And yeah, it struck some sort of nerve because it went wildly viral. I think right now it's almost at like 700,000 views or something totally insane like that.
Yes.
Yeah, and our account right now, we only have 11.5 thousand followers, so that's a really big
deal for us.
Yes, if anybody wants to look at it, and it's pinned to the top of their Instagram. And I also saw that you did a whole podcast talking about this, right? Yeah. So a whole, I think, hour-long episodes. You can go over, where you could go over in detail how to evaluate.
Yeah, the podcast episode, I basically did let's take this framework and do a real-time test. And so I was looking at this company called Cadence that makes shoes for people either with foot drop or, weakness, things like that. And I was assessing is this brand with all these doctors promoting it, with a lot of influencers promoting it, are they behaving more like a doctor, more like a brand? And so it was interesting. It was interesting to look at that.
So helpful. So yeah, and you're absolutely right. Getting a medical degree and being a doctor, you do get this automatic level of trust, some validation from that, and people can abuse it, so I think you do have to be wary. So, okay, I definitely want to get into it now a little bit, but before I get started, I guess I have to just do a little disclaimer and let everyone know to please, that this is for educational purposes. Please seek medical advice and clearance from your own doctor before you do anything we're talking about here. So, okay, I guess let's start with why do we need to exercise? Some people are just, healthy at baseline. Or they think they are healthy at baseline, but we're aging. What are, and so what are the benefits? What are the benefits? Why should everyone exercise?
Well, yeah, I'll take this one. So there are numerous and profound health benefits for exercise across the lifespan. And, for one, exercising in two main ways, I think, just to keep it simple, which would be cardiovascular exercise or cardio endurance exercise, and then strength training. These two forms of exercise, which can look a number of different ways. Okay. There's a vast number of ways to engage in both kinds. They have a lot of overlap between them, but they're not necessarily interchangeable. The types of benefits, health benefits that you get from cardio training include improvements to your body's energy delivery systems, which is a way of saying, you're going to make your heart healthier. You're going to make your body's ability to have energy better. You're going to improve your metabolic health as well. You'll decrease your feelings of fatigue in all aspects of your life. And you'll be able to have the energy to get the work of your life done. Strength training, you get some of that from strength training, but much more so from strength training, you're going to improve your muscle mass, which is one of the main organs of longevity is muscle. You're going to improve force production, possibly make big improvements to bone density, especially in childhood and adolescence. You'll improve soft tissue resilience across the lifespan. You will preserve your ability to age independently, and also metabolic health benefits. Reducing injury risk is a huge one. So strength correlates with fall prevention. Strength correlates with injury risk reduction in athletics. And, life is kind of like a sport in some contexts as well. Mm-hmm. So cardio and strength as forms of exercise, and we probably talk a little bit more about what do we need to be paying attention to with these two forms of exercise, are just so important for health and longevity, but also mental health, right? So when we exercise, we tend to feel better. And then as a result of that, we make decisions that might be more health promoting. And then as a result of those, we feel better, right? And so there's this self-reinforcing positive cycle from exercise. Exercise, I think, is also a wonderful way to be with other people. If that's how you like to exercise, you don't have to exercise with other people, but that also brings along with it its own kind of mental health benefits and longevity benefits. So I think for health, number one. Now, there's other benefits that I think are tangential to that, like performance benefits, if you're an athlete of some kind, or if you have some type of physical goal, as well as aesthetic benefits, right? If you're trying to change how your body looks, exercise is a free way to do that.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily an easy way to do it. It's definitely not a quick way to do it, but it's certainly a way to change your body composition. What Sarah and I focus on a lot with strength as the primary form of exercise we teach is what strength allows you to be able to do, what it allows you to be able to be better at in your life, but then also what it allows you to dream about, right? Like, what do you want your retirement to look like, right? What do you want, what do you want having your kids, want to run around with you outside? What do you want that to look like? What do you want being able to take care of people, which is something that most women are doing in some respect. And some of them, it's their entire livelihood, right, Sarah? Like, what do you want your ability to do that to look like as you age? So yeah, why should people exercise? Right. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Why should people?
I know.
I think it's why should people eat? Why should people sleep? Right? Why should people eat? Oh my gosh. Why should people sleep? Now, the negative downstream effects of not exercising are much more delayed than not eating and not sleeping.
Yes.
But they are there. And I count exercise. Of course, I'm biased. I'm an exercise professional, but I count exercise in the big three, right?
I love that. Yeah. Yes, that list was so long. And I mean, I think the other thing is, when you're younger, when I was younger, it was just more the body composition. I wanted to look really good, but now as I'm aging, what you said really resonates with me so much. I want to be independent as long as possible. I already had an injury. I broke my hip, overtraining, doing too much cardio, running too much. And so, osteoporosis runs in my family, so I think that, preventing disease, reducing your risk for disease, living longer, being strong, and being able to be independent and take care of others as long, because you can't if you need caring for either. So caring for. So that is a very valuable information for everyone. Thank you.
We like to say that. Yeah, we like to say that. Oh, am I muted? No, we like to say that strength is a retirement plan.
Yeah,
I because agree. It really is. And there's a lot of evidence correlating, especially lower leg strength, with like a 30% increase in longevity. There's a lot of like sort of direct correlations of having more muscle mass on your body and being able to survive things better. Something that didn't come up in the bio, because I guess I haven't updated it, is that I actually am just finishing with a round of 6 months of chemotherapy because my cancer actually came back. I'm doing really, really well. My scans are fantastic, but this was a physically demanding experience going through chemotherapy. And I was so glad that I had packed on easily like 10 pounds of muscle in the years between having cancer, because it allowed me then to be so much less frail during the process of going through something that is like metabolically and just intrusive in the way that I would like to live my life. And so it's a retirement plan, but it's also like it's like putting better tires on your car kind of thing. It's like sure, you could still drive with the crappy tires through this ice. But let's say you'd spend some time putting I don't know enough about tires. This is probably a terrible analogy, but like the idea being like you could be more prepared in case something like this happens, right? It's a form of insurance in a lot of ways.
Sarah, I'm sorry that came back.
Sure.
And no I'm glad to hear it's going well, and I wish you the best of luck with that. And I agree. I think, that's such an important point, because I think sometimes like these wellness influencers, fitness influencers I feel like they give people this false idea that by doing whatever they're telling people to do, that they're going to avoid aging and disease. I'm like, that's just impossible. It's not, it's not like evading disease and aging and death. That's just not going to happen. We are all going to have struggles. And I love your point here. We don't know what it is that we're going to get, but I love what you're saying here, which is like being prepared to fight it, or to tackle it and to hopefully survive, better and longer. So that's an excellent point too.
Yeah. And I think for women, it's such a different focus. And this is what Laurel and I talk about all the time, is to your point about how women, certainly in our lifespan, but historically, the goal for women with exercise and with diet is to look a certain way. That was really it. It was all about appearance. It wasn't about, how are your lungs doing on the inside? How's your heart doing on the inside? None of that. How are your muscles? No. What do you look like? And so our focus has really been about helping women change that message for themselves, because it's so internalized and it's so sneaky for most of us. And so thinking about like exercise as a way to just improve the quality of your life, not to necessarily change your appearance, although it might, right?
Yes.
That's a big thing we promote. Yeah.
More as the icing now. Like if you look better because you're exercising, but yeah, it has so many more fundamental and valuable benefits. So, okay, you kind of already addressed my question about like how to develop fitness goals. And I guess that's very personalized for each person, thinking about their age and what they hope to achieve in life, But I guess where to start if you have never exercised?
Yeah,
Where do you recommend beginning? It can be overwhelming.
Yes. And I think that is the problem for most people who are not currently exercising, is because there's just this avalanche of information about like, what's the best possible way? It's this. No, it's this. No, you do this first and then you do that. I think a lot of people see that, get completely overwhelmed, don't know where to start, and then just kind of give up. And we end up with whatever the statistic is in this country. It's something like 80% of people are not meeting the minimum health guidelines as put down by the CDC and the WHO.
For exercise?
For exercise.
The physical activity.
Wow.
Yes. Sorry. Physical activity. I just said health. I meant physical activity guidelines. So
wow,
this is happening to a lot of people, right? And there's also a lot of other social confounders, determinants of health, where it's something like maybe you have 2 jobs and you don't feel like you have time and you're exhausted from looking after your kids. You don't live in a neighborhood that's safe to, take a walk at night when you get home from work. There's a lot of factors that go into why people don't exercise. Generally speaking, for someone who is brand new, the best exercise is whatever they like to do, because it means they're going to do it. So if they like going for a walk in the park with their friends, great. If they like going to a spin class, do that. If they have, sometimes the community aspect, like what Laurel talked about before, is really helpful for people who are beginning, because there's a sort of collaborative aspect and you've made friends, there's some community. So maybe it's going to a class that you really like Zumba. Maybe you're like, CrossFit seems interesting. I want to try it out, right? There's so many different ways. So, but the basic advice is, find something that you like to do, because any exercise is better than no exercise. We have these guidelines around cardiovascular exercise and around strength exercise, but if you're not doing either of them, it doesn't matter what you do. It's going to still give you health benefits.
Okay, that's amazing. I love that. Yeah, and I've gone on, like trying to focus I'm just going to talk about like going on dates, for example. Like I've done so many dates like where we're eating so much, and when we shifted that to like, okay, let's do something, like I've done more interesting things like roller skating and dancing, and that's actually fun, and you're active and you're getting to check the exercise box for the day.
Sure. My experience has been like, let's grab a coffee and take a walk. with the coffee.
I love that. Yeah.
Because it's also
that.
like, also my own experience, it's a lot less awkward than sitting face to face. If you're walking side by side, you don't have to like make or avoid weird eye contact. Like it's much more, I like it a lot more. So
I love the idea of just building it into something you want to be doing anyway, or with your life. That's great. Yeah. So like, how often should you like aim for daily, some type of daily cardio? And then how much do you build in, say weights, and where do you start with that?
Yeah. So this question is about, exercise frequency, like how frequently should you work out? But the CDC guidelines, which I think are an excellent starting point, right? Okay. The physical activity guidelines. If you don't exercise, I think a great goal to have is to try to meet the minimums that are set down by the CDC. And the CDC provides some guidance, but it's very general because this is advice given to the entire population at large. It has to be very, very general, but it's still extremely valuable because it's backed by mountains of research. Okay. So for cardio, that would be things like going for that walk. And we can talk a little bit about like how hard the walk should feel for intensity and like stuff like that. But for someone who's not exercising at all, I think just starting to go for walks regularly and or any other type of cardiovascular exercise, trying to get 150 minutes of moderate intensity, okay, or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity. So you get a little bit more bang for your buck when the exercise feels harder, which is great if you're short on time. So that's a time amount, and it doesn't actually matter how you break that time up. So yes, you could exercise every single day and you could do shorter bouts, right? If you're exercising every single day probably shouldn't feel hard, right? Because you want to be able to recover from those harder bouts of exercise. For strength training, the guidance from the CDC is even more vague. They say twice weekly whole body strength training. So the twice weekly is probably because if we try to do too much strength training all in one go, what can happen is that fatigue that we've accumulated from the session will start to interfere with our ability to be productive later in the session and to actually make changes to the thing we want, which is strength, right? So they say twice weekly. And then by whole body, okay, this is vague, but we can think of whole body as being lower and upper. And then by major muscle group, it gets a really, really overwhelming because we have so many muscles, but you can just think in terms of movement patterns. Okay. So what I'll often recommend are try to get these 4 major movement patterns. Okay. There's lots of different movement patterns, but these are the ones that train the biggest mass of muscle. So for lower body, try to do some squatting or lunging. That could also look like stepping up onto a box, things like that. And then try to also get some kind of back of lower body exercise, like things like hinges. Okay. So that could be like a deadlift, a kettlebell swing, but it could also be like bridging, different types of bridging or hip drives or hip thrusts. You can also go to the gym and look at the pictures on the machines, and they will show you like, this is going to work this whole group of muscles, and this is going to work this whole group of muscles. Machines are an excellent place to start, by the way, because you don't need a whole lot of experience and skill to use a machine and get benefit from it. For upper body, the muscles that push and the muscles that pull. Okay, so look for exercises that you can Google this, right? Ask AI, like what exercises should I do to work my pulling muscles? What exercises should I work to work my pushing muscles? Show me pictures of these machines at the gym. Show me pictures of these exercises. Like there's just, the internet provides such a vast resource, and it can be really overwhelming, like Sarah mentioned. But if you know what questions to ask, it can be a little bit easier. So twice weekly whole body strength training, I would aim to do between 3 to 4 sets per week of these major movement patterns at the minimum to make it whole body. Okay. So you could probably get whole body strength training in twice a week for sessions that are less than 45 minutes long, including the warm up.
Okay. Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much. What a nice way to think about it. It is overwhelming and there's just so many type of strength training exercises that it's just like, I can't do all of this. That's what it feels like. But I love how you separated this out into 4 buckets. So, just going back a little, just to define a little bit more in case somebody's listening to this and they really have no idea. I'm going to ask the dumb questions or what feels like. I hope you don't think it's dumb. So, like, what's the difference between moderate, versus vigorous? You mentioned, So, like, are you breaking a sweat with vigorous? Is that what you mean? Like, versus is moderate just walking?
It's there's different ways to measure it. The easiest way as just a regular person has to do with basically whether you can talk or sing while you're doing it. So moderate exercise is considered, sometimes you'll hear it called zone 2. There's a few different terms for it, but it's considered when you could talk, you can still talk, but you couldn't sing. And the talking should feel like it's adding effort to the whole experience that you're talking. And then vigorous is considered you can't talk or sing. So it's the kind of thing you think about, like maybe doing sprints or, the effort part of a circuit when you're working through the exercise, although that's not typically cardiovascular if you're using weights, but any kind of like really vigorous exercise where either talking or singing is not going to happen.
You could probably say you could probably utter a few words.
Make this stop.
You're not going to solve the world's problems, right?
maybe you, Laurel, since you're a marathoner.
Yeah, Laurel could utter a few words. I could not.
The thing that's interesting though about intensity is that it's person based, right? So there is a vigorous intensity where I can't really utter more than a few words. Now I might be running at a I might be running with a face of suffering and at a pace that is faster than someone who's, not a runner. But my heart rate relative to my maximum will be within a certain range. And so will this other person who's relatively more untrained. So it's going to feel hard for me. It's going to feel hard for them. But we might, because of the efficiency that I've gained over many years of practicing running and engaging in running, I might be able to move my body a little faster. Does that make sense? Or I might be able to go a little longer.
Yes.
But vigorous intensity, everybody, the fastest marathoner in the world, Kipchoge, has a vigorous intensity. Mm-hmm. He's just going to blaze by everybody when he's at that vigorous intensity, right? And the other thing too, is running is not the only way to engage in cardio. I just want to make sure, those people who are listening who are not doing any cardio, you don't have to run, right? Moderate and vigorous intensity can be attained in any form of cyclical cardio is ideal. Okay. And so cyclical cardio is a type of repetitive form of cardio where your body repeats the same movement pattern again and again and again. Walking, running, swimming, biking, rowing, cross-country skiing, the machines at the gym, right? These are all forms of cyclical cardio. You can engage in cardio at a moderate or vigorous intensity in any of these forms of cardio and many, many more that I'm not naming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love those terms and your definition because, like I've heard about, how to get into zone 2 or 3 and like the heart rates, and it just makes it so complicated.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just nice to be able to just use your own, how you're feeling as, and to identify whether you're doing enough exercise or intense enough exercise.
I would say that the heart rate conversation is the zone conversation. And that's for later if you get really interested in the performance side of endurance training. Mm-hmm. That's when that kind of calculus becomes maybe more important. Another way to know if it's vigorous or moderate or vigorous is just by feel. And you said this, Kyrti, you said it's good to focus on what you're feeling. So you can actually assign a number to what you're feeling to make it a little bit more. So first of all, to make it so that it's something you're actually paying attention to and evaluating, which is important to do. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, and everyone calibrates this a little differently. So this is how I do it. 1 being sitting on a couch, 10 being the hardest you've ever physically efforted in your life. Okay. Moderate is somewhere between a 5 and a 7. And vigorous is like 7, 8, 9.
Okay. Nice.
So, find 5 and then go, okay, if I go up quite a bit from here, right? And then find 5 and then I go down a little bit from here, right? Notice how your respiratory rate changes and what that means for whether you can sing, right? Yeah. Solve the world's problems or just utter a few words. Okay. Yeah, and so those are two handy, fantastic ways to gauge, am I moderate? Am I vigorous?
Yeah. I love that. I think that's a lot of why people avoid exercise, because it seems overwhelming, but you've simplified it really nicely here. I love that. You mentioned the 4, different body areas to focus on with strength training. And you mentioned the CDC recommends twice a week, but do you have to do them all like the same day? Like I know some people who do legs one day, then they're doing some other body area the next day, then they're doing some other body area the next day. So, and
you're not, you're not going to want to do every exercise and then the next time do every exercise, because there's going to be too much fatigue left over, most likely, depending on, exactly how much time there is between when you're doing lifting sets. But ideally you're bringing in these 4 types of movement, right? The sort of squat, hinge, push, and pull. But there's so many different types of exercises that you can do that are in those categories that probably the most ideal way to approach it would be like have certain exercises on one day and then do a totally different set of exercises on the second day, so that you're still working the same muscle groups, but in slightly different patterns. And that way you are going to avoid the fatigue, but also the potential for injury if you're only doing, let's say, 5 different exercises, but that's all you ever do, right? Okay. So you want variety, you want overlap, because we want to see changes happen. And if there's too much variety, we're not going to see any. It's like planting too many seeds and not watering any of them, right? We want to plant a few seeds and just keep watering them. Okay. And you water them with different types of exercise, but the goal is the same.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier Laurel was talking about, focusing on 3 sets for each type of exercise. And so I guess my question about that is, so you mean you do a certain exercise until you how long do you do it? How sore are you supposed to feel?
It's a great question.
I'll do squats and, I don't know, I'll stop at 12, but I probably could keep going.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Your question is about whether or not we should pay attention to, right after we've decided how many sets of these exercises we're going to do in a week, which I think 3 to 4 is the minimum and more is probably better, but you don't necessarily want to start with the most, right? You want to start with, let's start small and build, right? But after you've had the conversation about how many sets of each of these movement patterns I'm going to do, by the way, these 4 movement patterns are also kind of just the macros, right? There's going to be so many other movements of the body we could target for different goals. Okay. So I'm just starting with the 4 to keep it really simple, but there's carries, there's core rotation, there's core exercises, there's calf raises, there's, all kinds of other different movements that you could be doing as well. So after we have this conversation about how many sets of these movement patterns we're going to do every week, okay, then the question is, so what should I focus on? Should I focus on how many reps I'm doing in a set? So the repetition is the movement that you do again and again and again in a set until you need to rest a period of time before doing that set again, right? Or should I focus on how hard the set feels at the end? And the answer is you should focus on how hard the set feels at the end.
Okay.
And that's what we call...
I do a number,
right.
Which is wrong. Okay.
Exactly. So before we were talking about running intensity, right? And we were also talking about running effort. Okay. So running intensity is what percentage of your maximum are you actually running at? And then effort is how hard does it feel? With strength training, we can lift heavier weights, and that's a higher intensity training stimulus. We can lift lighter weights, and that's a lower intensity training stimulus, and both can cause us to get stronger. What's really important is that at the end of the set, whether it's a set of 5 reps with a heavier load or 20 reps with a lighter load, is that the set actually feels quite hard. And what does that mean? So we can also put a number to that. Okay. With strength training, because strength training is tapping into a different energy system than moderate intensity running is. Okay. We want the set actually to feel quite hard. So we don't want it to feel moderate. We actually want it to feel hard. And what that can mean is that you are working to a 7, 8, or 9 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. Okay. But it could also be a little bit, I like this other way a little bit better because to me personally, it feels more objective. The question can become, how many more reps could I do if I kept going? We don't have to go until our muscles give out. In fact, we really shouldn't for most exercises, and especially beginners, because you'll be too sore, okay? And your form might break down to the point where you're doing reps that are done with inefficient form. But by the end of the set, as long as your form is maintained, okay, and you're not, the wheels aren't wobbling too much and your form isn't getting too messy, you should feel like you could only do 1, 2, or 3 more reps.
Okay.
So you end the set with a little bit in the tank, or you end the set with a little in reserve. So reps in the tank, reps in reserve is often how this is referred to. And leaving 1 rep in reserve is going to feel harder. So that's like a 9 on a scale of 1 to 10. Leaving 2 reps in reserve is going to feel hard, but not as hard as 1 rep in reserve. That's an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10. Leaving 3 in reserve is a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10. Do you see how these numbers actually all add up to 10?
Yes.
Right. So there are 2 different scales, 2 different tools to use to gauge whether the effort was high enough. And it is hands down the most important thing to pay attention to.
Okay.
So on one hand, we have how many sets am I doing? That's volume. And on the other hand, we have how effortful are these sets? We want a minimum number of effortful sets to reach the physical activity guidelines, but to make changes to our strength.
Okay, I've been doing it wrong, but thank you, thank you. See, I'm learning.
And the reason this is important is that people, they have goals, right? And their goals are often related to being stronger. But if the sets aren't effortful enough, you won't see those changes to your physiology, and that can be really demotivating. Right. So it's very important, actually, that you make sure these sets are tough.
I guess to defend myself a little bit, I'll say if it seems like at 12, I'm like still like, let's say I'm doing like, just using free weights. If it's feels like I'm not tired enough, I'll increase the weight, but I could just be doing more with the same weight.
Yeah.
And increasing the weight is a good idea too, because if you make the weight heavier, that same number of reps that you did with the lighter weight will probably feel challenging enough by the end. Right.
And I can't do 12.
Right. So if you do 12 and you're like, I could have done at least 10 more. Well, then depending on what weight you started with, pick up a heavier weight, maybe 5 pounds, maybe 10 pounds heavier, depending on, what the weight was when you started. Right.
So another question I have, which I think is something I've seen you guys talk about on your Instagram, is, whether what's better? Do we need heavy weights? Do we, how heavy is too heavy? So I think that's a debate I've seen online.
So the current research, it depends on what we're lifting for. So a lot of messaging, and ours included, has been towards women of our age, let's say, 40 and up, mid-30s and up, where a lot of the messaging around building bone density was that initially that it had to be heavy lifting as the intensity. Heavy lifting is considered something that maximally you could lift 6 times and then you'd be done, right? That's considered roughly, there's a lot of debate around what's heavy, but it's not your 3 sets of 10. It's not anything like that. Then more recently, research has shown actually, yes, you can lift heavy for bone. That's still true, but you can also lift moderate and still get benefits to bone. And a moderate rep range is more like that, 8 to 12, 8 to 15. It also, that's also debated. So, but with that in mind, there are actually still a lot of benefits to lifting heavy beyond its effect on bone. And the biggest one is that it's going to make you maximally strong. So if one of your goals is to get, strong AF, let's say,
yes,
you are going to benefit from Not initially, right? This is definitely something you have to work your way up to. It's what we do in our program. You don't start anyone with heavy lifting. That's like saying to someone who's not exercising, okay, go out tomorrow and you're going to do 10 sets of 30-second sprints. You would never do that, right? So you start where you are, you do this progressive overload, like Laura was, like you were just talking about, where you increase the weight based on how it feels. Eventually, you will work your way up to heavy lifting. And yeah, getting as strong as you possibly can really comes with lifting maximally. And I will say as well, from a more sort of like socio-emotional, patriarchal standpoint, there is something, it's something that can be hard to describe until you feel it yourself, but there is something so empowering about lifting something really, really heavy, like legitimately heavy. There's something about it where it starts to make you feel like, oh, that thing that I made a big deal out, that's not a big deal. I can deal with that. I mean, it makes you resilient in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it makes you see the things in your house and be far less intimidated about, having to schlep them around and move them around.
I mean, a good example is my mom is 78 and I started her lifting barbells about a year ago. And she has said to me things like, oh, I go to take the Diet Coke cans out of the car and it feels like nothing. And I'm like, yeah.
Wow.
It does feel like
it must feel so powerful. I mean, when you don't need a man to open a jar.
Right.
Exactly.
Even something like that. But I actually get that feeling just seeing women who are really powerful women, strong, powerful women. Like I feel like, I don't know what it is, like some kind of like, yeah, women can do whatever men can do, like I get this like little pride. So yeah, I want to get there too. So we are running out of time, but I have a couple other things we're not going to get to all the things I wanted to talk about, but another thing that occurred to me while we were talking is we didn't really talk about the core, right? Like core muscles, like, is that included with the hinge exercise kind of thing, or is that something additional? And I guess
I love this question.
Importance of that.
Yeah, you gave us a little bit of a heads up as to what questions would come up, and I loved the question. So, from a scientific standpoint, core strength is important when the demands of whatever task you are engaging in or have the hopes of engaging in require it. So there are sports, there's forms of work, there's types of daily activities that definitely involve exerting force through the trunk or resisting trunk motion. And in that case, it would be very important to engage in some kind of probably ideally direct core training. Now, your question about these major movement patterns, they do secondarily or even, more tangentially than that, train the core. So for example, squats, right? If you're holding some weights and you're squatting up and down, your core is having to stabilize your body during that movement. Same thing with if you're doing a deadlift or a bridge, like the muscles at the back of your trunk. And everyone defines core a little differently, but I like to think of the core as really just the muscles that wrap around the center of your body that resist or create, forces. The hinge, the lower body exercise, the hinge and the squat and the lunge, these are gonna ask your core muscles to work. Same thing with upper body exercise. I mean, anyone who's ever tried a push-up knows that that's that's definitely a core relevant exercise, or a pull-up. It's definitely a core relevant exercise. Rows, right? If you're bent over and you're rowing weights, like your back is working quite hard. The question becomes like, what are your goals, right? And that ultimately should always be the question, especially if it's a performance or aesthetic goal, because these are more specific goals than just health or longevity. We can gain health and longevity in an infinite number of ways with strength training and cardio, literally. But when we have a goal, we actually have to be much more specific in terms of the exercises we select. Now, everyone thinks core strength and core exercises are uniquely special and beneficial for things like, and I'll let Sarah speak to this, like pain reduction in the lower back, for example, or that they're uniquely beneficial for things like posture. Okay. Here's what research shows, right? Research shows that if there is any uniquely beneficial category of exercises for health and longevity, it's not the core, it's the lower body. And Sarah already talked about this, right? So lower body strength correlates with longevity and fall risk reduction. Now, trunk control is also a risk factor for falls. And I'm not like able to provide some comparative analysis of like, which is more or less important. They're both important, but typically all lower body exercise that is compound in nature, where you're moving through multiple joints at the same time, hips and knees, right? Hips, knees, ankles, is going to involve some amount of core stimulation, but not all core exercises. In fact, I would say very few involve lower body stimulation. So it's one of those, like, if you're going to choose, if you only have a limited amount of time, like, get the upper and lower body going in a meaningful way. And then if your goals pertain to some kind of core function, you absolutely should incorporate core training. Direct core training is going to be a way better way to train your core than squats and deadlifts for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. You've really helped open my eyes and helped me think about this a little differently. Okay. Another question. The other question I probably will have to end with is mostly because it's been really confusing me and I want to know. A lot of fitness influencers will recommend supplements, for optimizing their fitness routines. Like, do you think people need that? And is there anything that's really validated? Like, I guess I'm talking specifically about things like magnesium and creatinine. And I'm like taking enough things between the calcium and the vitamin D and the thyroid medicine. And
I'll tell you from my personal experience, the more I learned about supplements, the fewer I take, because there are some, creatine is an example, where there are measured benefits under certain conditions.
Okay.
But the vast majority of supplements either provide no real benefit, or the benefit is so minimal as to really not be that important for someone who is maybe just starting out with exercise. Benefits might be most valuable for like elite athletes kind of a thing.
Okay. Yeah.
But the average Joe or Josephine is, being bombarded with messages that they too need to take this because they need to perform and blah, 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 blah. And the reality is it's just not true. So, and especially if you're not with the example of creatine, it's useful in the presence of weight training. So if you're not weight training, it's not doing that much for you. Maybe nothing at all, right?
Yeah.
Just draining your bank account.
Yeah, you're training your body to have expensive urine. So that's the case for basically a lot of supplements out there. And the reason why we see so much of this is, one aspect of the human condition is we're always sort of looking for the easiest way to get a result. And it seems way easier to buy a powder and make a drink than it is to move your body physically and take it outside and take it for a walk. We're sort of, inertia tends to get us in for various reasons. And so the reason why we see so much of this is it's a huge market. The wellness market, which is what this is a multi-trillion-dollar market annually, right?
Wow.
It's big money. People get very upset about big pharma, but big wellness is basically big pharma if it was unregulated and just a bunch of cowboys. It's the absolute wild west. And the other thing, if you're a listener and you're like, well, how do I know? The easiest thing to do is you go on the product page, you scroll down to the bottom, and there's some tiny print that says something like, these claims have not been evaluated by the FDA. Individual results may vary, right? That's a really easy way to know this is probably a waste of your money. That's my feeling about supplements.
Thank you, ladies. This has been so good. I'm so excited to share this with everyone. And yes, that is such a good point you make, about, people being really wary of the pharmaceutical industry and not wary enough about this wellness industry. Okay. So any closing thoughts from either of you?
I would just like to say, because I love saying it. I say it to my husband, it drives him nuts. Like, we have to stop majoring in the minors. We really have to stop majoring in the minors when it comes to exercise, nutrition, right? And start majoring in the majors. And chances are you're not being sold enough the majors because there's not as much money to be made. The real money is in the minors. So ask yourself if you're tempted to, make a change or an investment. Like, am I majoring in the majors here or am I majoring in the minors? And the majors, exercise. That's a major, right? Invest in exercise. I'm just going to get on my soapbox for a second too. I think people are far more inclined to want to invest their money in the minors for some reason. Like, okay, I'll spend this money on this supplement or I'll spend this money on these, gadgets and gizmos. Far less inclined to want to invest their money in the majors. That could look like getting that gym membership, getting that one-on-one training, getting that group fitness access, getting that, home equipment so that you have it in your house and now you don't have to go out if that's something that you don't want to do. It's making these investments in the majors in terms of exercise. And the same thing can be said, but this is not our wheelhouse, like about nutrition, right? Start majoring in the majors.
Thank you. I won't be buying that creatinine.
It's not where I would. It's not where I would. Creatine. It's definitely not where I would start.
No. Right. Also, it's the other one you can
such a small thing.
Yeah, the other one you can get rid of is the collagen. That's also doing nothing for you.
Completely throw that. Okay. That's really
that you throw in the garbage. That's doing nothing for you.
And it's
Okay, so please let me share with me any future plans or where you'd like to, where my audience can find you and follow you. I'm sure they're going to want to get some more words of wisdom from you guys.
Sure. We are Movement Logic Tutorials on Instagram. That's really the only social media platform that we're on. Our website is movementlogictutorials.com. And we offer a 6-month barbell online lifting course that is aimed at women. It's not exclusively for women, but it's a lot about teaching women how to use barbells, how to overcome whatever obstacles they may have put in their own way around that. We're also developing some new content coming out in May that has to do with power, the use of power, which is another category of a type of exercise. And our podcast, we do either every week or every 2 weeks. And we talk about topics like this. We do a lot of myth busting. We interview people. So those are all the ways that I can think of. Laurel, did I miss a way?
No.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you for having us on.
Thanks for having us.
Here's my closing thought for today. In the patriarchy, women have been sold a set of beauty ideals that is meant to keep us weak, fragile, and vulnerable. But in the Gynarchy, we seek to redefine beauty as health, strength, and resilience. And we use exercise to transform us into more powerful versions of ourselves. So down with the patriarchy and up with the Gynarchy. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider taking a moment to leave us a review on one of the podcast platforms. Thank you so much for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of the Gynarchy Podcast? Know someone else who might enjoy this conversation? Make sure to subscribe and share the show with your friends and family. Find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and just about anywhere you find podcasts. On social media, we can be found on Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok at The Gynarchy. Thank you so much for listening.